Hello, good evening, and welcome to the ETC Dialogues presented by SAP. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Today, we will chat with top leaders of the consumer products industry. We'll have a discussion around aligning with consumer preferences and staying relevant in the next normal. I am Alokesh Bhattacharya, Senior Editor of the Economic Times, and I am joined by my colleague Suchetna.
Yeah, hi. I'm Suchetna Ray. I'm a senior assistant editor with Economic Times. I welcome you all today for this discussion. Thank you so much for taking the time out. According to social media oracles, we hear that Newton discovered gravity during a lockdown. And guess what? When he was done with that, he had some more time and he came up with the calculus. So we're looking forward to some sharp insights from our panelists on how their companies are handling the COVID situation and also the next big innovation with which this situation has really inspired.
We have a very powerful panel here today. So let's have a quick round of introductions. We have Rupinder Singh Sodhi, the Managing Director of GCMMF, or better known as Amul. We have Harshvardhan Agarwal, Founder, Promoter Director of Imami. We have Sunil Kataria, CEO India and SARC of Godrej Consumer Products. And
We
we
also
also
have with us Sanjay Sharma. He's the CEO of MTR Foods. There's Varun Alag. He's a co-founder and CEO of Mama Earth. And we have Nimisha Jain, partner and MD BCG India. We welcome all of you once again.
And we also have with us Devdeep Sengupta, the President and Managing Director of SAP Indian Subcontinent. Thank you, Devdeep, for joining us. Thanks to all the panelists. Great to have all of you with us today, and we look forward to a really strong debate. So, one of the things, if we just do a quick context, one of the really dominant images of this crisis that will probably remain etched in all our memories is that of the empty roads and the Kirana store, right? The Kirana store and the rush to buy essentials is something that we will probably never ever forget. In the Kirana store, there's an old Bengali belief, my mom and everybody's mom who's in the lower middle class or a middle class Bengali, they say ki Mudir Dokan is the best business to be in. Mudir Dokan means the mom and pop store, the essential store, because no matter what happens, the earth comes crashing down, and something like the pandemic happens, essentials you are going to need all the time. You will need your milk, bread, eggs, food grains, your cereals. You will need your sanitizers, you'll need your soaps, detergents, mosquito repellents. You will need them all the time.
But to have a continuous supply of these essentials in your home, consumer product companies must continue their manufacturing. That's absolutely essential and cannot afford their linkages with supply chain partners to wither or their distribution and logistics networks to develop holes. And we've seen how that worked out during this pandemic and the pandemic induced lockdown. Supply chains have received unprecedented shocks from it. And we've also seen the wave of migrant labor returning to their homes. And these two have had long lasting impact on supply chains. The distribution network is also under immense pressure. Big selling points like modern retail are facing historic low footfalls. Companies' operational viability is under unprecedented strain as balance sheets are stretched. There is also hope as Fitch very recently predicted that a strong rebound is in the offing in the farm sector in the second half of FY21, while they have also told us that the overall levels might remain lower than 2019, but there is a rural demand that could be revived in the second half.
So, what is the skill set of the season? The new skill set of the season is how to expertly manage cash flow, right? And it's not about any other thing. How do you manage your cash flow best is the skill set of the season, along with the ability to develop an understanding of the new consumer. The consumer, like Suchetna said, consumer shies away from modern retail, prefers the mom and pop and e-commerce stores, down trades to low price products as well as brands, curtails discretionary spends to the maximum. Jitna chahiye utne mein karna hai, right? And so all these things are happening all around us as we speak. Now, to get a deeper understanding of this whole scenario and for a stronger perspective, we will spend the next 5 to 7 minutes listening to more insights from Nimisha Jain, partner and managing director of BCG India, before we dive into the group discussion. Nimisha, all yours.
Thank you. So over the course of the last 100 odd days of the lockdown, it feels like 100 years, I must tell you. But the last 100 days of the lockdown, we've been very closely tracking the consumer in India, but also globally. And what is clear is that this is a crisis like never before. What you see on this page are many words that consumers are continuing to play back to us. But two things stand out. One, over 80% of people today are social distancing. Even as the lockdown has opened up, they're continuing to social distance. They're avoiding going out. They're avoiding interacting with people. And over 50% of them are cutting back on their total spend budgets for the year because they expect an economic crisis. They expect a lower income. Now, while all of this sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, when you look further, what is really interesting is the fact that this is translated into a set of very interesting themes emerging on how consumers are behaving differently. Psychologists tell us that crises are times that shake our deepest beliefs, that shake our schemas and translate and make us try new things and develop new habits. And let me call out a few very interesting new habits that are emerging. And I'll tell you that by telling you 3 stories, right? One, there is a 35-year-old homemaker who we spoke to recently. She has been using a dishwash soap, the same brand, for many years. And she knows that there are more expensive dishwash liquids out there in the market, but she has never used them because she doesn't use the dishwash soap. She uses her household help actually washes the dishes, and she's never seen the need for it. In the lockdown, she has upgraded to spend more on a superior dishwash liquid because it's softer on her hands, because today she is washing the dishes herself. She doesn't want her domestic help in the home, and this is something she wants to do herself. She knows how important hygiene is. She's also investing in a set of floor cleaning and other hygiene products that she's never used before, again, because she believes that at this time, it is even more critical to keep her family safe. So yes, overall, consumers are cutting down on spending, but there are pockets where they're starting to spend a lot more. Another story. A 65-year-old couple we spoke to has never engaged in e-commerce. They live alone, they're empty nesters, they have children, grandchildren who live somewhere else. And their children have always told them about the power of e-commerce and how amazing it is, but they've always hesitated to try it. For the first time in the lockdown, they have actually entered e-commerce and used e-commerce to buy the products that they want. But they haven't done it by going onto a classical e-commerce platform. There is somebody in their condo who has created a WhatsApp group. This person collects orders from all the people in the condo who are not comfortable with e-commerce, places the orders on an e-commerce platform, has them delivered to her home, and then re-delivers it within the condo to various households, including the 65-year-old couple. A fascinating story of e-commerce adoption and social commerce at play, models that have reached scale in markets like China, but are actually starting to get scale in India in our own unique manner. And the third story is, when within about a month of the lockdown, I actually went out and spoke to a few retailers, Alokesh, the mom and pop stores that you were talking about. And a very interesting insight. They said that they have never sold as many baking products as they'd ever sold before. They have never sold as many packets of hair color and waxing strips as before. And that's because consumers today are finally adopting do-it-yourself and DIY practices where they're cooking, they're looking for kits, they're doing beauty regimes at home, again, because they don't want to social distance. The page that you see before you has many other such examples, but just 3 stories to illustrate how consumers really set in their habits, who've refused to change for decades, have actually adopted new behaviors at a time like this because of this combination of social distancing and crisis. The real question is how much of this will last? How many of these are trends that are a flash in the pan? How many of these are structural? The jury is out and no one knows, but we do believe that many of these habits will stick. Again, because if you continue a habit for long enough, it becomes a new habit and a way of life. A new normal is clearly emerging, and with it comes opportunity. My son is a big fan of Formula One. I don't watch it, but what he tells me is that in Formula One, if you are ahead in the race, it is very difficult for somebody to overtake you if the weather is sunny. But if it is raining and stormy, a car can overtake as many as 10 cars ahead of it and come out first. And I think this is a time where there is opportunity in this adversity. When we've looked back on crises across the years and across the world, there are between 1 in 6 to 1 in 7 companies that do emerge stronger. And those that are able to understand and decode some of the trends I talked about are able to adapt their operating models, leverage technology and apply agility are going to be able to succeed and come out as that 18% on the page in front of you. I'll pause now and hand it back to Allocation Suchetana. But I'm really looking forward to having an enriching conversation over the next hour around what are some of the things that this group is seeing on what it will help them get into this 18%. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nimisha. You've really set the stage for this discussion, and through which we expect sharp insights to come in, insights that will help businesses combat the crisis that we're in. To sum up what you said, we are creatures of habit, really, and crisis like these leads to new habits. Therein perhaps lies new opportunities for businesses. And to take this thought and the topic of the discussion forward, let's begin the panel discussion. And to do that, we will first look at backend, wherein we will discuss configuration and reconfiguration of supply chain and associated ecosystems. All of you here, all my panelists, you have multi-tier supply chains. So how are you really managing these networks as well as your inventory in this situation? Are you rethinking your supply chain partner network just to become relatively more Atmanirbhar in case a situation like this arises again? Whoever wants to take it first. Should we begin with Mr. Sodhi?
Thank you, Suchetana, and nice to hear Nimisha's comment on new habits and opportunity. The first thing about the supply chain, everybody is talking. My perspective will be mainly food. And no doubt during lockdown, the first thing I think every member which has been talking right from early morning to the evening, food. What to buy, what to cook, who will cook, how is the taste, where to get the recipes. I mean, this food was a common topic across families. And when you talk about supply chain, and most of the viewers or participants think supply chain of food is factory se leke to the consumer, and that everybody use. No. You see, like the supply chain, we know from factory to the company warehouse, to the distributor, to the retailer, to the consumer, whether through kirana store or modern trade or e-commerce or so many other alternatives which have come during the lockdown. Same complexities, same difficulties of supply chain backward from factory or to the wholesale market to the farmers. So coming, I'll give example of milk, because we know only milk only. In case of Amul, our supply chain starts with 36 lakh farmer members who are the owner of Amul, and their 60 lakh cows and buffalo. So please mind the lockdown, what our Honorable Prime Minister declared on 24th of night at 8:30, it was for us, for human beings, not for cows and buffalo. So nobody can tell them that tomorrow morning the lockdown after 12 o'clock, please don't give milk. So even if we want, we cannot stop that supply chain.
Right.
So twice in a day, you have to collect milk, you have to check the quality, you have to transport it to nearest processing plant. So fortunately, because milk was declared essential product, so we could run the supply chain from farmer to our processing unit without any disruption. No doubt, this time technology was with us, and there were we knew which farmer, which village, how the milk is coming or not coming, where tankers are being stopped, and how it is being processed, which market it's going. I mean, Mr. Dev Sengupta is there, and we have got SAP throughout. I mean, I remember 90s, it was manually when I handled the similar type of lockdowns, curfew in Ahmedabad when riots were there, and everything was manual. But this time, because of a whole technology available, SAP and other apps, we knew everything, what is happening, which village milk is coming, which not thing, which market distributor is open, not open, goods have gone to the market. So that was the biggest advantage of technology and the supply chain during the lockdown. So I feel there was no doubt problems were there, getting permissions and other things. But I would like to congratulate and thank you all the administration, whether central government or state government. I think everybody has given them much more than our expectation, help, cooperation, not only for our supply chain of our transporters, supply chain of our packaging material supply. Because you see, you can't milk products, packaging material is coming. So how they also opened up, we have to take permission from them, bringing transporter, bringing labor to the plants. So I can say that it is because of the supply chain working both backward and the forward, we could supply the essential product like milk and people to get sitting at home without any disruption at the same price. So people could sit in, otherwise people would come out. But this is what regarding supply chain.
Welcome to Sunil from here. Mr. Sodhi spoke about how supply chain has helped them during the crisis. What does your business, what do you think about your business when it comes to supply chain? Do you need to rethink your supply chain network to make yourself more Atmanirbhar the next time such a crisis hits us?
Yeah, okay. I think first of all, one point which I would just maybe, although Mr. Sodhi's business and our business are pretty different, and one thing definitely was, Mr. Sodhi, first of all, I want to congratulate you on one thing. I think, while Mr. Sodhi has been, business is in, as essential a thing as a milk, which you can't survive without. But I must say that during lockdown as a consumer, I think Amul has been a company which has been able to maintain their supply chain of milk and daily essential products, even from the first week itself. So Mr. Sodhi, congratulations. And I think
thank you
to your team for this, So having said that, I think there's definitely a difference between, as Mr. Sodhi said, some of the food essential products, and which he rightly mentioned that food has been on everybody's mind, obviously, because it's a basic thing which you need to survive in a lockdown, and our businesses are slightly different. So I think if I were to see the journey of the last 90 days, I think definitely, I think while the lockdown was announced very suddenly and with a very no notice period, I think maybe after the first week, the administrations really came in together, I think between the industry and whether it was the central government, the Ministry of Consumer Affairs or the Ministry of Home Affairs, as well as our federal structure, which is the local district administrations. I think while there was obviously initially challenges, but I think then everybody kind of found their ways and came together to make sure the country's essential services run, and essential services and obviously food and essential products run. Because had that not happened, let's say in the first 10 days of April, of the lockdown, and let's say by the first week of April, we could have had very, very serious social unrest, because finally, the shelves would have run out and they had started running out. So I think one thing definitely, all the players, I think finally in some way with Indian Jugaad or processes, we found our ways around it.
Right.
And then,
Sunil, when you talk about finding our way, we were really playing by the ear. As you mentioned, Jugaad, that's how the entire system came together. What were the lessons that you have taken from that system, which was almost on the verge of falling apart, but then you guys came together and pulled it together? So are you putting in a plan so that when the next crisis hits, you already have the plan in place, you just have to shift your business there?
Yeah, so for example, Sunil, if for example, are you looking at alternate sources of supply?
Yeah.
Closer sources of supply to your manufacturing plants? Are you looking at that kind of sourcing? Are you changing your sourcing strategy? So that if certain critical raw components are coming from high risk areas, how are you handling them? Because you can't get those components from those high risk areas, right? So how are you managing your inventory? And
so I think a couple of changes which have happened, obviously, and I can again tell you a lot of these are moving pieces. Because one thing which we must remember, one trend which is very clearly here to stay till we find a vaccine and have a complete surety of this virus having been eradicated, is that we are going to live in a stop-start economy, right? That the lockdowns will open up because everybody is realizing one thing, that lockdown is not an answer, a permanent lockdown is not an answer to the virus anyway, because the economic hardships are much, much more tougher than, having people not being, hunger can take over much more damage than, let's say, the virus per se. So I think we have to manage, as the Prime Minister recently said, both lives and livelihoods. So we are in a stop-start economy, and that has a huge implication on the supply chain. So the number one implication, I think, is there has to be much more dependence on and in and around your units on the local ecosystem. I think that's one area that we are picking up now, whether it is in terms of finding and arranging labor which is local residential labor, because we have seen a huge amount of reverse migration which has happened. So earlier there would be a large component of labor which should have come from UP, Bihar, and other states. Let's say if my plant is in my biggest soap plant is in Malanpur in Gwalior, a lot of labor would have come from other states. So one clear shift is that you have to be ready to have local residential labor available to you, and that's one part of the local ecosystem. Secondly, I think is very clearly in terms of sourcing when you talk, just like Mr. Sodhi was talking of, maybe 36 lakh farmers and 60 lakh, cows. I think in our system, there's an equivalence. Obviously, numbers don't run into that large, but our supply chain is not only about our, let's say, 60, 70 own manufacturing units. It is actually about maybe 370 other packaging and raw material suppliers who are directly not under our control, but a very critical part of our overall supply chain system. And they do not necessarily reside in my local geographical system. So while I can manage the local labor, I think that is a place where we have taken a couple of steps. I think for the future will have to happen. You will have to work with your suppliers to have a much more agile distribution center system, which I think could be the way the future may shift. That while today we talk of our regional warehouses and regional distribution centers for our finished goods, I think at least one thing which may emerge is that for some very top 80-20 Pareto suppliers, which each of us can identify very easily, who are, let's say, very mission critical to your business. You may have to work into some kind of a regional supply chain system of warehouse system for our top suppliers as well as, and that is one thought which we are looking at into. The third, obviously, I think, which is a stopgap arrangement, is that till this continues, we will also have to do a 80-20 in terms of portfolio prioritization. I think that's a very important piece, which again is shaping up. That finally consumers have first and foremost trust in the brand, and making brand available is much more important, and making your top SKU available is much more important than maybe the entire range. So I think even manufacturing, while you do this Pareto analysis in terms of what you want in your back-end supply, I think this first analysis of your 80-20 in your portfolio management also becomes very critical from a manufacturing point of view. And the last and the foremost, obviously, is I think a journey which, thankfully for us, we have been on it for almost now 3 years, is the entire, what do you call the digitized manufacturing, or IoT-led manufacturing. And thankfully for us, that's a journey we had started on 2 years back. I think that clearly takes a huge amount of acceleration. So I would say these 4 pieces.
Thank you, Sunil. With your inputs, I'll go to Harsh. Harsh, what do you have to say about the crisis-induced challenges as far as your supply chain networks are concerned? Are you rethinking them to just brace yourself better for the next crisis? You're on.
Suchetna, first of all, you have been saying again and again about the next crisis. I think we hope.
I hope it doesn't strike us.
I hope, yes, there is no more such crisis, first of all, right? And yes, I think, see, it is very difficult to, first of all, plan yourself much in advance for a crisis like COVID, right? I think nobody could have imagined, even if they would have tried to imagine, what are the challenges. I think it's very difficult to sometimes even imagine many kind of such crises which might come up. So yes, what COVID has taught us is that, yes, crisis can be of any nature, of any magnitude. So yes, as companies, how you all are agile to take up or to meet those challenges is something what everybody needs to learn. Secondly, I think, now going forward, from the perspective of the supply chain, I think many times it's important to anticipate things, because many times you cannot see all the wheel that is moving around, which is not totally in your control, right? Suppose, for example, if I tell you a simple thing like, the master box. Now, how is master box made? Master box is made, one of the raw material which is used for it is the waste paper, right? Now during the lockdown, the collection of waste paper was not happening, right? So it could have happened, that there could have been a shortage of paper even to make master boxes, right? So sometimes, I think going forward, what is important for each and every company and for us is we are trying to just anticipate areas and things where we believe challenges might come in the whole supply chain, right? And yes, there will always be something which you cannot visualize, but as much as possible, you have to work towards that. In regard to, yes, local supply, I think that's very, very important and very critical. As a company, we have been working on it since some time. But yes, how do we improve there? How do we work more on that area is something, which is very important.
Thanks, Harsh. I'll go to Sanjay. I will not use the crisis word again. I'll ask you for lessons that this pandemic has taught you. We've been talking about agile distribution centers, building local ecosystems. What are the lessons that you take from here?
Thank you first for inviting me for this session. I think it's great to be here and great to be amongst such an august gathering out here of CEOs and business heads who are here. From a manufacturing point of view, I think first I must remind all of us that we are still in the crisis mode, right? It's 3 months. It may seem a year, but it's just 3 months that we've been in crisis, and we are not even out of it to think about the next crisis. So we are still fighting our battles out here, and we are still on an everyday alert kind of a situation. I think so far we have gone through the 3 months, and we've gone through probably 2 phases of the crisis. I think the first phase I think everyone got hit was really trying to re-establish business continuity. Okay, and it was also a great phase for us. It was a crisis phase, and it was about how do you bring the entire system back, right from, for Sodiji, it was from a village, a household to his factory. For us, it was from the farmers to our third-party manufacturers, and then coming back into our factories. How do we secure our raw material, packaging material supplies? Luckily for MTR, 60% of our raw material, packaging material comes out of one state, which of Karnataka. So, and luckily for us, Karnataka was probably one of the best states in India in terms of the government response to. So I know for a fact, because within the 3 days, 4 days, while people were struggling for labor and many, many other things, we were up to 80-90% manufacturing levels in terms of getting our production back. Yes, our workers had gone out to their villages. Karnataka government helped us to arrange. I mean, we arranged the buses, but Karnataka government and the police helped us to get our labor back from their villages, and we had no problem. We got over 120 to 130 people back from various villages back to our plants and establish this thing. Luckily for us, from a manufacturing point of view, we also got an early heads up, because as you know that MTR is now a Norwegian held company. So our principals in Norway had already signaled that there's a crisis coming up. Please start doing things. So we had started thinking about contingency planning probably by the 7th to 10th of March. And we had started to take our inventory levels up. We had started to look at how are we going to secure our supply chains, and several other things were well in place already. But if I was to look at everything, and I was to look at, you asked me about learnings. If I was to look at both the phases, and in different phases we had different needs, but what really stands out for me across these 2 phases have been 3 things. I think first has been, how agile are you as an organization, and how do you respond to a crisis? So how do you respond? How do you get your supplier network up? How do you get your packaging material network up? How do you get your factory to start working? How do you get your distribution logistics going? And how do you get the goods to your distributors' place? I think so. How agile you were, and there are several examples of agility that were shown by our organization to ensure that we were able to respond to the crisis. The second thing that we started to work, which is not really in the first phase, when once we've established business continuity, We started looking at the increased demand that we were facing from the consumers and from the sales. How do we respond to that? And for that, what we started doing is really starting to look at distributed manufacturing. So first phase was how Atmanirbhar were you, but the second phase was distributed manufacturing. So we started looking at, because there was a phase for us, MTR, we used to produce almost 90% of our materials through one factory. And if something happened in that factory, it means our business would have shut down. So we started looking at what do we need to do in terms of distributed manufacturing, which is going to third-party manufacturers. How do you get, your production done at several locations? We had packaging material was all in-house. We started to de-risk that by sending it out. We started looking at supplier networks. We had single supplier networks. We went to multiple supplier networks, and so on and so forth. So you started to do what we call as distributed manufacturing. That actually helps you reduce the risk of dealing with yourself in a contingency like this. And the third thing that we started doing, which is really, once we have agreed that this is the new normal which is set into our lives, which is really now in the month of June, I would say, is really looking back and saying, okay, what are the resilience factors that we need to build in manufacturing? So we started looking at, what are the inventory levels that we should maintain, how we should look at multi-supplier networks, how we should look at distributed manufacturing from a future point of view. Although it's still not really important for us to think about the future, but I'm still talking that, today we are still going through a phase where the cases in India are still rising. Every day there is a new challenge that our manufacturing system is facing. There is always a fear that there will be a COVID case which is going to happen in your factory, and your factory is going to shut down for three days to 1 week. How are you going to deal with the inventory levels out there? What is the level of inventory do you want to maintain at your distributor level? What is the level of inventory are you maintaining at your warehouses, distributed warehouse inventory, as concepts like this? So we've been working with a lot of these things to ensure that we are building resilience in the organization, to ensure that the unknowns that are going to come to us in the next 3 to 6 months are something that we can tackle without really impacting the organization very hard. So it's been a tremendous phase of learning and really inculcating a great culture of responsiveness to the environment as far as MTR is concerned.
Thank you, Sanjay. In fact, very good points, and taking off also that sort of common points between what you and Sunil also spoke about. Sunil spoke about the IoT-enabled manufacturing. You spoke about distributed manufacturing. All of these issues have a lot of technology behind them, right? And whether you talk of distributed manufacturing, and we have an interesting question from the audience also, which is asking us, is the future going to be about global supply chains or local supply chains? Right, so there is a trade-off, right? And over there also technology plays a big part in how you integrate those supply chains together, right? If you're going to have a complex, multi-layered supply chain, then without technology, you're not going to be able to do it. So I'll bring it now to Deep and Devdeep Sengupta of SAP. Deep, give us some insight into supply chains from a technology perspective. IoT and distributed manufacturing are very closely also related, because distributed manufacturing is when you're doing it also, you need a lot of intelligence, right? And there's a lot of data involved in it. So give us some insight into what kind of technologies you think work here, and what should our companies and panelists and audience look to do.
Yeah, thanks Alokesh. First and foremost, I'm fortunate to be with the panelists, and most of our customers of SAP. So thank you for inviting me to a panel like this. So I'm in a pretty comfortable position. So
almost all large companies are your customers.
even mid-size. So no, thank you for that. I think we have been fortunate. So the way I look at it, Alokesh, is very simple. First and foremost, we listen to our customers in terms of some of the key challenges and issues they're facing. Because obviously, this is a completely, nobody's seen a situation like this. So there is no forecasting, there is no predictability, there is nothing you can do about it. But as we have been speaking to our customer, there are two key trends which are coming out, and in fact, this panel also talked about. One is obviously where technology can definitely play a role and should play a significantly more role. One is in business continuity practices, and number two in ecosystem resilience. And I'll give you some concrete examples. So when you get back to work, like Sanjay talked about, when Sunil talked about, Mrs. Sodhi has already, they've been continuously, they've been an essential service provider. But when many companies, or Harsha also talked about, when you get back to work, how ready is your supplier base? How ready is your labor base? Right? So you will have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. Have you been able to, there's on one hand, you have the demand situation, on the other hand, you have the supply readiness situation. Are they, because they are also possibly far more impacted by this situation, both in terms of their labor, their basic infrastructure. So what we have seen, companies, today there are technologies which are available, fortunately from SAP as well, where you can do a supplier pulse check in a very, very short period of time. And you can look at which are the suppliers who are ready in terms of labor, in terms of their readiness to get back to work. And, so that's one of the best way to get back to work. As you get back into production, as you start looking at your demand side of it, I think the key concern today would be equally on the supply side of it and your supply readiness. So technology can play a significant role in your supply readiness part of it. So that's number one. Number two, if I flip the coin on the other side, if I look at the supplier side of it, right? And that's where in India, it's a pretty fragmented and a disaggregated market, right? There are, you have mid-sized companies, you have very small companies across the entire fragmented market. And they have some basic fundamental challenges, which many companies here will not face that. It's whether it's with the working capital, whether it's a simple survival, and some of those basic fundamental challenges, right? And them getting paid on time. So what we fortunately also work with many of these smaller companies, right? And one of the things what we have done, and that's where the network effect comes in. In fact, I'm not, Alokesh, I'm not sure if you're aware. So SAP runs this network called Ariba Network. It's a marketplace, global marketplace, which has 3.2 million suppliers globally connected, right? And it transacts about $3.5 trillion of trade every year. In India alone, there are about 70,000 suppliers who are on this platform. Okay. So what we have done is that we have made this platform open and without charge till end of December to onboard as many suppliers as possible, so that they can become discoverable, not just to India, but to a global ecosystem, so that they can find new sources of, I would say, demand. So, these are 2 or 3 ways, I would say technology can help. And more importantly, a socially responsible organization can also help impact the overall ecosystem. So, just at a high level, I didn't want to really delve into the kind of technologies which can be possible. Obviously, the panel over here is pretty well informed. So, there are, and we have been working with them, each one of them individually. Technology can definitely play a significant role and will continue to play a significant role. But I think it is the agility, it is a continuity, and it is a resilience which will matter a lot.
Right. Thanks, Deep, and very, very succinct and very sharp points. And I'll come to Varun with that, because Varun, you're a startup and Mamaearth has made a huge name for itself in a short while. And congratulations on that, very well done. But one big advantage of a startup is technology, right? Because, you are basically a technology native, and unlike the other panelists who are mature and older organizations, but the disadvantage is that they also have legacy systems that they need to address and bring into a structured data to be able to get those insights. You don't have that, right? You're just leapfrogged into the new era and you're starting afresh with the latest technologies. But what about your supply chain? Like, is it as complex, and have you faced as difficult situations as the others have? Tell us a bit about it.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for having me on this panel. It's a real August. I'm feeling so good that our company is also being represented here. And From a supply chain perspective, I think first of all I would say yes. While we are a young age company, we're just about 3.5 years old in terms of our existence, and there were a few industry learnings which we almost took for granted, right? So over the last couple of decades, there are two big things that have happened, and one. To improve on margins, everyone felt that we should buy from sources which are cheapest for a certain product. And even if it means that you have to sort of build in a 3-month tag time for that source, right? Go to China and buy something, go to Eastern Europe and buy something else. And let's do that because it will finally lead to an improved margin structure. And parallelly, especially in the last decade, what started happening was on the inventory side, almost all companies started saying, hey, while margin has improved, but cost of capital continues to be a concern. And so why not reduce the inventory days, right, and release some working capital from there, right? And a lot of companies started moving into first JIT systems at their own warehouses, and then JIT even at distributor levels. And suddenly we have a new term into play which has come in. When we also started, these were kind of established norms, right? So this is what you were largely playing with. This is like, hey, this is to be taken for granted, so to say. But there is a new term which has come into play now, which is cost of uncertainty, and that is what is making us rarely think differently around some of these things. And so while technology is there, but I think this cost of uncertainty and building that into supply chain has led to some critical sort of changes in the way we think, right? So for us, I think the three biggest learnings have been one around localization, right? Which is at least for wherever possible, and localization on multiple fronts. So one is, of course, localization and trying to source from India as much as possible. And two, as Sunil mentioned, localization of sourcing from geographical ecosystems and communities. So if your factory is somewhere, ensuring that your packaging OEM and your label OEM and the other partners are also in that same sort of vicinity. And so I think that's the first thing that we learned. And the second thing that we learned, which is slightly anti, right, but still needs to work parallelly with this, is decentralization, which is not relying on one location only. And that applies to all parts of your supply chain. It applies to sourcing of packaging. It applies to production, and it also applies to having multiple hub and spokes in terms of your forward distribution. And so I think that was a specific learning. And during this time, we ended up, we used to have about 3 warehouses before this, right? And some of the panelists might be thinking, wow, that's really small. But hey, we have moved from 3 warehouses to about 8 warehouses and opened 5 different cities in these 3 months itself. And so in terms of percentage growth, that's a lot, right? So that's what has really helped us, right? In fact, the other thing that's the third principle that we have learned, and is that, in our case, we're a disruptively growing company. I mean, we're growing at about 700% over last year. And in fact, post-COVID, that number is further jumped now. And that number is now, significantly more over Feb than what it used to be over last year. So suddenly going long on inventory and as a principle is something that we're clearly picking up. And from earlier working capital management and keeping a tab of inventory days, and to now moving and saying, hey, even if we need to invest extra in our own FG or in our packaging inventory, and the cost of that is significantly lower than probably keeping capital anywhere else. And because in times of uncertainty, especially what we're expecting over the next 6 months, and turning that inventory around is going to give us significantly better leverage on our capital than not having inventory and facing fill rate issues. And so I think that's the third principle that we've sort of learned from this.
Thanks, Varun. That's a lot. And, you really don't need to be, you don't need to feel that you're very small, because as you know, the software that we are using is called Zoom. And Zoom is now higher valued than General Electric and Unilever. in terms of market capitalization, right? So, you know, startups take no time to reach that value. So I'm sure you'll do well too. You know, I really love this audience. You know, we have more than 400 people listening to us at this point, and we are getting some very, very strong questions. And if I have to ask all those questions, I think it will take us till tomorrow morning. But there is one very sharp point that has come, which I want Nimisha to just give us her view on, and which says that there's this gentleman Jayanta Roy who has written that looks like the local contingency planning has overwhelmed the global SCM. What do you have to say to that? Looks like it, right? What's your view on that?
Yeah, so let me answer that in two parts, right? One is, even before COVID, we were starting to see a very different form of globalization from what we had seen over the last few decades. You know, the first wave of globalization was around, you know, product supply chains moving, sourcing from China and low-cost countries, you know, and so on. And that was already starting to slow down, you know, with 3D printing, with, you know, more flexible factories, and not just in consumer products, but even in categories like auto and others, which have really heavy global supply chains. You know, the nature of globalization had actually started to change. What we were starting to see was a lot more globalization on, you know, on digital ecosystems, on sharing of software, or there are brands that had gotten created globally, you know, within a matter of months. Pokemon is a great example of that, where it scaled up faster than any other any other game, and it's so globally. So we were seeing a new form of globalization, and I think what's happened in COVID is that some of those trends have just now gotten further amplified. So the need for a physical local supply chain has become all the more important. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be a complete substitute. So I think time will tell. But, you know, as many of the panelists have spoken about, what we're really starting to see now is much greater flexibility in supply chains, much more distributed supply chains, and really the ability to then be able to pick and choose where you supply from rather than locking into one. Because, and I'll pick what Varun said on the cost of uncertainty. The one thing that's real is that this uncertainty is here and it's going to be here for a long time to come. And the only way to plan for that is actually to plan in scenarios rather than try and pick one, because nobody knows what the actual answer is going to be. And I think the same is true for how we need to think about our supply chains.
Yeah, Nimisha, there are several questions coming in, as Alokeshda pointed out, that there are over 400 people who've joined us listening in. This question is related to the uncertainty that Nimisha is talking about and how this uncertainty is actually driving the way consumers are behaving. The question is from Ashutosh. He's saying COVID has showed us that consumers are stocking up now for 2-3 months. Does that change your strategy in any way? I'll begin with Harsh.
See, I don't know whether consumers are stocking for 2-3 months, maybe in few of the areas, maybe in medicines, or maybe very few items. But I would like to believe, you know, that yes, they are upstocking in certain things, but not to that extent, right? And yes, you know, they are upstocking in areas where I believe the supply might be a challenge in future.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those uncertainty in the mind of the people have also reduced in the last 3 months. What it was, you know, just before COVID.
At the beginning of the lockdown.
Yes, whether I will get food or not, whether, you know, I'll get basic things like milk and those things. So those uncertainty in the mind of the consumers is much less, I would say.
Okay, we'll start a discussion on the second thread of our conversation, which is front end, which is about consumer and demand. My question is for both Sanjay, Varun, and then I'll go to the others. Do you see a new retail model? Do you see that there's been a shift from the e-commerce versus Kirana store story to a new story about how e-commerce and Kirana should perhaps learn to coexist? And is it the new consumer behavior which is impacting your product and delivery strategies? Sanjay, Varun, whoever wants to take it first. Sanjay, go ahead.
Okay. I think it's situational at this point of time. I think it's not something that will pan out in the long term. But given the current situation, and the current dynamics the way it is. Obviously, e-commerce is certainly been promoted by the government, but I think one thing they forgot, that almost 80 to 85% of the consumer universe is actually serviced by mom and pop stores or the Kirana network that flies. And in this entire mix, there is also this element of modern trade. So when I look at my own business and I look at the breakup of my turnover between these things, e-commerce was 2.5% of my business. Modern trade was about 14 to 16% of my business, but still, I would say a good 80% of my business was still 82% of my business was still coming out of general trade. How has that changed? I think, yes, we see a tremendous growth in e-commerce. E-commerce has doubled, but has doubled to now 4% to sales. And that's just happened in just 3 months' time. In fact, in 2 months' time, we went from 2% to 4% of sales from e-commerce, and e-commerce continues to grow extremely rapidly for us. Modern trade, on the other hand, has actually kind of remained stable and stable at this point of time, or maybe have grown as well as a part of our portfolio, because many modern trades were continuing to do well, and there were many other types of modern trade which were restricted because typically people did not want to go into a store where there were a large number of people who are coming into these stores. And then people slowly started to realize, again, it's about the different phases of the lockdown. In the first phase, people went and stocked up things, but in the second phase, we are now starting to see better availability of goods across everywhere, and people are actually now, if you talk to consumers, they are more comfortable going to Kirana stores and shopping, because that is the place where they feel lesser number of people are there. I can go anytime, it's closer to my house, and I feel more safer in some of those environments.
And you can control the amount of time it takes you to get hold of a certain product also.
Correct. So the consumers are still looking for some kind of a shopping experience, and still being able to do that. Having said that, Kiranas have also got severely impacted in this entire thing, because wholesale markets have been curtailed, because again, the Chennai incident of the wholesale market that happened, infecting a large number of people out there. Subsequent to that, we've seen a lot of wholesale markets being actually regulated by the government, and not are being opened on alternate days and several things like that. So flow of goods has certainly become a problem in these things. But you do see the emergence of the Kirana coming back, and becoming a very vital part of the supply chain, as it was always, I would say. It's not a new phenomenon. It was always an important part of the supply chain, and it continues to actually strongly stand as a part of the supply chain now.
Perhaps it just got strengthened a little more during this time. Perhaps. I'll take the question to Varun and Sunil. Do you see a new retail model evolving? Are you thinking of new ways? Are you rethinking your delivery strategy as far as your products are concerned? Sunil, Varun, whoever wants to go first. Varun.
So Sucheta, I think what Sanjay mentioned, our business is actually on the other side. So 90% of our business is from commerce, right?
Yes.
We strongly believe that it's actually, from a modern trade availability perspective, when modern trade came in and we talked about, hey, this is a big disruption in Indian retail landscape. And modern trade finally was able to reach about 800 pin codes in terms of the geography of the store expansion. And it's for the first time, e-commerce has taken FMCG categories to 27,000 to 29,000 pin codes, which is really deep. Right? I mean, these are pin codes where sometimes the store universe also doesn't exist, right? And hence, it's for the first time the consumer is realizing and believing that there is opportunity to actually buy online and get any kind of product. Right? That said, there has been a conversation and attempt at the hyperlocal model, which you talked about, and which has more been aimed at convenience-driven categories and grocery, and which is something that probably nobody in the world has till now been able to crack. Not just in India, but in very evolved e-commerce markets like US, and this pain point of convenience shopping and grocery delivery still sort of continues. It's not been fully resolved. But yes, I think this time has given companies which are into this and wanting to solve this challenge a bigger opportunity as well as a time to focus specifically on this problem. And because you're like you rightly said, you don't want to wait for 2 days to get that pack of milk or to get that cheese that you want for breakfast, right? You want it there and then, and hence that nearby Kirana store is what you want to rely on. And now probably a new model will take shape, and we are seeing roots of that model in geo stores, etc. Looking on. But I still think it's years away before that model sort of becomes large enough. And right now, during these times specifically, I think Kirana stores have rarely stepped up, to showcase what their role in the FMCG ecosystem is, and provided access to essentials when they were desperately needed.
Sunil, I'll come to you with the same question. Your products are available on e-commerce sites as well as at the local mom and pop stores. But the thing is that, are you rethinking your distribution strategies? Because going ahead, as all of us are seeing that consumers will be more and more wary of perhaps physically going to a store and picking it up. So are you thinking of a distribution strategy which will reduce the touch points?
Yeah, so okay, I'll just maybe take it in, 3 different parts of the distribution go-to-market strategy. So I think, as it's been mentioned in the discussion, that there is obviously a large part of India, is 80% of FMCG sales primarily are still through, general trade, which is large general trade or small mom and pop stores. And then there is obviously around 15% is modern trade. And then given the companies and the categories, anywhere between 2 to 5% would be e-com as of today. Now, the question is, one thing which is, I would say, in the next coming year or so, which has to completely rethought out of the 3, I think is the modern trade piece. And I had mentioned recently in one of my interviews also that modern trade will have to rethink its model along with FMCG players. Because one of the biggest things which modern trade's success, mantra has been A, large assortment, B, value for money promotion-led discounting proposition, and C, definitely an experience. Because you can touch, feel, see the assortment. There's obviously a conditioning environment, right? And then obviously many of these modern trade stores are within malls, so it becomes like a full shopping experience and outing itself. In that sense.
And you can physically check out your options.
Yeah, and you obviously have the experience of the product itself. So now these have been the winning mantras, which have made modern trade, especially in the last 2 years, really do very, very well. Now what's happened right now is going to actually break one of the biggest principles around which the whole success was built, is of modern trade shopping being a social experience itself. Right now we're talking apart from social experience being social distancing now, right? And that fear is not going to go away in a hurry. So those days when you used to see lines and queues outside for the big Wednesdays or the big Thursdays, people waiting for huge discounting, and it becoming a full family outing kind of a day itself, are gone. I think that's very clearly. And I think one of the biggest changes which within FMCG space, as well as obviously the retailers, will have to all rethink is the modern trade model. I think within modern trade, and that changes are happening, within modern trade itself exists 2 models. One is this large hyper market model, which actually thrived on this. And the second was a limited assortment, 2.5 kilometer radius reach kind of a model, which is your neighborhood, small store format.
Yeah.
And it's very clear to us even right now that the small store format within modern trade actually is succeeding more right now than the hypermarket model. So I think within, if you ask me, for us in FMCG, how do our relationships with modern trade and these future models of modern trade emerge, I think is a very critical point to work on. And that's one thing which we're doing. There's also one more thing which will happen is many of these modern trade stores, and I'm talking both the formats, will have to start working on home delivery systems. Because that's something which today, let's say, who gives the best? Today, home delivery, pre-COVID days, the 2 home delivery systems are available only from neighborhood Kirana, who's brilliant at servicing, and the second was e-com, right? And e-com was small. So I think one of the pieces variable which will start coming to modern trade pieces, how do you become home delivery oriented, right? So I think one big piece, if you have to ask me, will change, will have to be rethought in the go-to-market strategy, is the modern trade piece. I think it's an important piece which everybody has to rethink.
Probably.
Can I ask a question at this stage?
Okay, maybe I would just, I'll take a question, then I'll complete my
No,
point.
please carry on.
Please go ahead with your point.
Okay. On the go-to-markets, on the general trade piece of the strategy, I think we are seeing a resurgence of the kiranas. And I firmly believe this resurgence is not temporary. And I'll tell you why. It has nothing to do with technology. This resurgence is emotional-led right now. Okay, this is huge. See, understand what has COVID done to us. More than all the business changes, what COVID is doing to us as human mind, psychological level, it's going to change our approach towards life forever in different ways. We don't know the impact of this, but it's going to make us reevaluate every piece of how we live and how we put value behind things. And I think gratitude and people who stood by you in crisis will be a very big emotion at play. And such things people don't forget in a hurry, right? I can tell you I was in Pune 3 days back. I did a market walk after 3 days, getting out of Mumbai district city. I took permission from the police commissioners and I went to Pune for a market visit. Otherwise, I was stuck to working with only Mumbai. And there's one retailer who told me, and we were discussing which companies have been able to service you well. And obviously I cannot get into the names. He said, not one, many retailers. I've asked this question continues to that. They said, we are very clear in mind the companies which serviced us right now, and we are very clear in our minds which companies failed to service us. And he said, this we will not forget. And the same is true for consumers. Consumers today remember that actually the neighborhood store really serviced them. And you can put a lot of rational logic to it that there will be less crowd there. It's much more easier to do. I think this gratitude is here to stay. And this coupled with obviously digitization of kirana, which I think was happening and which is bound to happen more with maybe more technology players coming in, we'll see kiranas resurging. Right.
Absolutely, Sunil. I don't cook well, and I entirely depended on MTR and on Godrej ready-to-eat food to see me through this entire lockdown. Sudha, you were going to ask something.
Yeah, that's right, Sunil. I mean, absolutely couldn't agree with you anymore. In fact, there was a campaign that we'd worked out for some FMCG clients and took it to them saying, would you really, I think one of the COVID heroes, during these last 4 months has been your neighborhood kirana, because none of us would have survived if, this friend of ours who we've known for ages hadn't stood by us. So there are 2 or 3 points over here. Firstly, as far as modern retail is concerned, Mukesh Ambani is going to pick up future. All right. So there is a lot of monopolization of holding structures as far as modern trade is concerned. That's on one end. And you know what happens, because as it is, modern trade squeezes your margins, your wafer thin margins to almost non-existence, on one front. On the other front, he's also done this deal with Facebook and WhatsApp so that he can link the local kirana with the digitize it through WhatsApp or deliver through the JioMart. So he's also getting into digitizing the local kirana. He's also getting into e-commerce. So Mukesh Ambani is going to be a huge force to reckon with as far as your distribution is concerned. So how is the FMCG universe looking at it? Is it with trepidation? Is it with promise? What do you think, they'll be able to bring in?
So I don't think so, you can never solve any problem with, anxiety or trepidation. I don't think so that's going to happen. We have seen enough of changes in the GTM strategy of this country evolve over a period of time. The same was said 20 years back when modern trade came in. And actually modern trade has become big. Let's say 15% of business is not small, right? It becomes a significant part of the business. And yes, the margin structures of modern trade, e-commerce and the GT are very different. And, these relationships will evolve, right? So I think, to my mind, it's very premature for me to even say how these, to that extent, if you ask me, Amazon is not going to be any small, or for that matter, Flipkart is not going to be any small. So I think these relationships always evolve between a retailer and a marketer or manufacturer. These are evolving relationships, and we've seen this globally. I think what will remain important in this game is the power of the brand, right? If you do not have a brand, then you are going to be dependent on a large-scale retailer to take you there, because then you are actually, your brand equity is weak. Then who are you going to compete with? You're going to end up competing with a private label, actually. then you are on a, then actually you don't have anything to negotiate, or for that matter, even why should consumer choose you? Because finally you understand, whether it's an e-commerce player, whether it's a modern trade, whether it's a GT, whoever it is, finally the end part lies with the consumer. We are all means to that end, right? And that end is where the brand comes into play. So to my mind, in all these situations, one of the learning which we learned maybe 20 years back, 25 years back, when we all began our careers, and one learning which will remain 25 years down the line is finally the brand. I think the power of brand doesn't go away, it only increases. If you're continuously investing in your brand and making consumers choose your brands, the rest all are means to that end. And those models will keep balancing themselves out. They will become relationships. Finally, it will thrive on a win-win. If any of the relationship become win-lose, it will not work. That I'm very clear about.
Right.
That
And
prompts me, 1 second, Alokesh. This is very interesting. See, during a time like this, when supply was strained and the local kirana had access to certain supplies and did not have access to certain other supplies because of geographical compulsions. So the consumer got really, he got to pick up and flirt with brands that he normally did not before. Okay, so he's experienced these certain brands. So isn't this a great opportunity for the number 2, number 3, number 4 kind of brands to really come out there and capture certain geographies and certain markets, at least to begin with, and show that they have the ability to become a leader? For example, Savlon has become really active in the last 3 months, while Dettol is the force, is the large force to reckon with in antiseptic care. Savlon, I think, has really stolen a huge march over Dettol in the last 3 months with all the aggressive activities like that they have gotten into. So do you think crisis also brings out opportunities like this for brands?
Let's go to Harsh with that question. Sunil, let's just go to Harsh with that question.
Yeah, Harsh.
And then we'll come to the others also.
Amol is always the leader, so I can't answer.
Yes.
No, absolutely. And then I'd love to add on as well.
Yes.
Harsh.
Obviously, I think, in fact, there is a saying that never let go a crisis, because every crisis opens a lot of opportunities, right?
Nothing like a good crisis.
So I think, the whole issue is, how you look at things, what mindset. If you start looking in the crisis, from the perspective of survival, then your whole initiatives, everything that you do, you start focusing only from the perspective of survival. From your mindset, if you start looking at things from the perspective of, yes, what are the new opportunities which it throws for me, then, companies will automatically start looking at things from perspective of opportunity, and that is what will help them grow and prosper even during the times of crisis. So yes, I agree. There are a lot many new opportunities which are there during these times. In the area of personal hygiene, in the area of health and wellness, etc., where we are seeing huge surge in demand. So yes, it depends on the companies how innovative they are, how they meet the consumers' expectations, the need, the demand, and obviously, it's a good time to become a really strong brand in those areas.
Right. Alokesh, you want to take them? Yeah.
Nimisha wanted to add on. After that, I'll come to Devdeep and Dr. Sodhi. You're on mute, Nimisha.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just say 2 things. In a lot of the research we've been doing over the last 3 months, there's 2 very interesting points that have emerged. One, that irrespective of whether it's a category that consumers are actually dialing up on, or a category that they're postponing because right now it's not the time, consumers still want to really stay connected with brands. But they want to stay connected with brands on what's relevant right now. So they don't want you to, and I'm going to use a different example. They don't want you, if you are a travel operator, to tell them about their next holiday. They know they can't go on that holiday for a long time to come. But if you can start to educate, if you talk to them about something else, like, you give them an online travel experience for their kids, because that's something that can keep them occupied during their school vacation, it's something they really value. Similarly, when it comes to beauty, I talked about this whole trend on DIY where people don't want to go to salons. They want beauty treatments at home. Consumers are really looking for brands to tell them how to use some of those products because they've never used them. They've always gone to a salon for certain services. The same is true for cooking. So I think it's
do-it-yourself kits.
Right, and it's really about not just kits but also the education. It's the DIY videos. It's about educating consumers on how to use and really staying the course with them on what matters at this point, rather than just trying to advertise what you want to say. So I think that's one thing that consumers really want. The other thing I think is that this is a time where there's a massive, every crisis there's a flight to safety, and flight to safety translates into a preference for trusted brands. But trusted brands don't mean they need to be the biggest or the largest. It just means these are brands that need to be trusted because you can rely on what they're saying. You can rely on the fact that the brand is available, that the brand delivers on its promise, and could be a small brand, could be a large brand, could be a startup, could be a well-established player, could be premium, it could be low value. But it delivers on the promise that it makes. And those are two things that consumers really care about right now because they don't want to risk experimentation. So you're absolutely right. So I think this crisis is one where habits are changing, and when habits change, consumers try new products and brands. But this time they want to try new products and brands with a difference, those that they trust and those that are really talking to them about what's relevant at this time, and not just trying to promote themselves in a manner that they have before.
Thanks, Nimisha. In fact, what consumers want, I wish all of us knew. Isn't that something? That's the holy grail, right? What our consumers want. And like Sunil was saying, different formats in modern retail will have to rethink. Maybe Sunil and MTR, Sanjay and others would like to rethink about creating your own stores because you have got the range of products across all items, right? Not just GCPL, but even Godrej Foods. And you've got all the products. You want to create small convenience stores? I don't know. Maybe the rents are too high.
Ensure that the delivery chains are also managed by them so that I get my products on time.
That's a very, very different model.
Lokesh, we actually have 6 MTR stores in Bangalore.
Fantastic. We should open some near my home.
Yes.
Because my wife loves MTR and we would love to just go there. But I'll come to Devdeep. The whole thing about the interesting after Devdeep, I'll come to Dr. Sori because understanding the consumer and using technology, and it's absolutely critical. So, Devdeep, you could tell us a little bit about how, consumer product companies can understand how the consumer journey is changing because they were used to a certain journey, which has been severely disrupted by COVID. And we don't really know whether you'll go back to the journey or not after COVID gets over. Because when things normalize, we might just go back to our old habits. Our habits that are changing might be just transient in nature. So what sort of technological tools and strategies can be adopted to understand, and capture new and emerging sources of demand?
Yeah. So thanks, Lokesh. So, I think first let me try and, I think there was a good discussion around e-commerce versus, hyper-local versus this thing. Modern trade, and the mix of the business. I'm sure, all of us know, typically what we call in technology world, we call it a phygital model, physical and a digital model. Because today, that's what is a reality. It's typically digital is very good in demand sensing, creating the brand and things like that. In a country like India, where last mile challenges are there you need the local kirana store for the relationship and the delivery and things like that. So the way I look at it is, from just to conclude on that point, what we have seen across the world, both in developed economies as well as emerging economies, or in countries like India as well, that it's phygital model finally, a hybrid model, which really makes it work because it depends upon the efficiency as well as the relationship and the and the trust. So both from the brand as well as from the local. I would say relationship. Now, coming back to what we see as a trend, I guess I'll step back a little bit. And I'll give a bit of a context. See, I think what any brands, whether it is consumer or anything, what us as brands we are struggling with. Today, consumer decision-making process has become independent of the brands. Right? You can go your own journey, go your own search, and this has happened in the last 2 decades. right? You do your own discovery, whether I'm buying my own home product or I'm buying from an organization perspective. So that journey has become completely independent to what as brands we believe we can influence. I think that's a reality we need to live with, right? And when you look at as organizations, what we do, we focus on processes and systems in which we can track activities, whether it is my sales funnel, whether it is my marketing activities, whether it is my service activities. It has got nothing to do with the customer journey. It has got nothing to do with the customers, buying behavior or sentiments. We outsource many of these to agencies. Now, what is happening is that if you look within the organization, I would have a fragmented view between my sales, between my marketing, between my agency data. So, whether it is data, whether it is automation, whatever you call it, it's a complete fragmented view, right? To be able to have a consistent, I would say, can you really see what a consumer look like? Like we have discussed for a consumer, so many times. There are different personas of a consumer, right? Do we know what are the various personas of those consumers across the various brand categories in our own basket, which is there, and how they behave? Now, to be able to achieve that, one of the things where the world is moving towards is what we call is the experience management or the experience economy. And it is not just about the consumer. It is about the consumer or the customer. It is about the brand, how the brand is perceived across all channels. And it is also about the employee, right? And finally, it is about the data. So if you look at, that is where the entire, I would say the technology or some of these trends are moving towards what we call is the entire experience management. And because that is what is going to make or break a brand in this decade.
Absolutely. And David, it's interesting you talk about experience management. My point also is that, in the absence of in-store experience, because in the COVID scenario, really people are not getting the in-store experience. Modern retail is not open. So are digital touch points, good enough to replace that in-store experience and still allow brands to reach their consumers?
See, you can reach, but as I said, that's why Alokesh started by saying, it is going to be a hybrid world. It is going to be a phygital world, right? We are possibly going through a phenomena, which is, I would say, temporary in nature, but I don't think so. One is going to replace the other.
Right. Okay, cool.
And that's a reality we have to live with.
Yeah. Dr. Sodhi, I was always interested to know, and now that I've got you here, I'll probably ask, that's why I want to ask you this, right? How do you actually understand the experience of a consumer who buys milk? Milk is such a commoditized, product. It's everywhere. There are some 7 dairies, around my home, which are the local dairies, and I live in Delhi, in Ghaziabad, and there are a lot of these local people, bhais rakhte hain aur uska doodh bechte hain. And you're competing with them. Of course, you're competing with Mother Dairy. You're competing with everybody, and you don't really know whether I'm going to the local bhaiswala to get my doodh, or I'm going to a store and buying Amul, or I'm going to a Mother Dairy stall and buying Amul and buying Mother Dairy. How, as an organization, does Amul understand its customer journey, and how do you adapt to shocks like the one that we are seeing now?
Well, Krishji, let me tell you, milk, or when I say we are in packed or branded milk, is not at all commodity. This is the most, very, very loyal customer. Like you read the Times of India or Gujarat Samachar, you will not change unless it is not delivered here. So milk is, once you switch over to any brand or any source, it is next to impossible, because it becomes, the daily use become a part of your habit, part of your family. And we have seen Amul may be very big #1 brand, but whenever we have gone to the new markets, in spite of all the best marketing mix, advertising, branding, the most difficult task is switching people from the existing brand to other, until they are dissatisfied or there are gaps in the product or distribution or in pricing. So one thing is that. So let me tell you, in milk, only thing what is required, we have to see that milk is also essential and highly priceless. So you have to see how your product is made, not only quality wise and availability wise, also it is affordable, and you can never go up and down with the inflation. With immediately consumption impact, and people then may shift to the branded to lose. Especially like you said, there are a lot of dairy around your home. You see, if you are buying from a dairy loose milk, suppose at 40 rupees a liter. If I give you at 50 or 55 or 60, you will not buy, only 1 or 2%. But if same milk or same dahi or same buttermilk, I give you at maximum 5 to 10% premium with the surety of brand, taste, and availability, you will, out of 10 people, 6, 7, 8 may consider shifting. I'm not saying they may shift. They may try it and then again they will go back to it. So in a food or in a daily use food, it is extremely difficult to switch the brand unless you are dissatisfied. And I mean, as far as we are concerned, we are monitoring each and every market, not only milk as such. You see, in the milk also there are a lot of varieties. And from gold to, I mean, if a fellow is using full cream gold, like market to market will differ. In North, we sell more of full cream milk like gold, but you go to Bombay, it is mainly the toned milk, which is the 3% fat. Although we are the market leader in all the markets, but market differs. And now I'd also like to add here, just because from the previous discussion about the modern trade, general trade, and other things, like especially related to the food or the milk. You see, we can't see whole India 85, 15 or 3%. In bigger cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bombay, modern trade used to be 40%, but now e-commerce has taken from the modern trade. But the smaller markets, milk is consumed everywhere. It is the general trade. I mean, you go to East, 95, 97% is general trade. So during this lockdown, shift has taken place between modern trade and e-commerce, and little bit in general trade is more or less remains same, or may have increased. And like digital touch point, I mean, for retailer also, like during this lockdown period, we found that for us going for salesmen is difficult to book order from shop to shop. We launched a cart like Amul Cart, where shopkeeper can book on app, order to the respective distributor. It's like local e-commerce. Similarly, like Sudhaji mentioned that few big names or few big companies are monopolizing, next to impossible in India. Because in India, consumers are so scattered, production is so scattered, and retailers are millions. Today, one retailer may attach to one fellow. Tomorrow, you find this fellow is giving better service, better, you'll switch over. It is in India now getting monopolistic situation like USA, where Walmart is there, or in Europe, Tesco is there, next to impossible.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sodhi. I'll take on from here and talk a little bit and ask questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about social messaging and brand identity. There has been a huge demand for health and hygiene products. Emami is working on those lines to launch products to leverage the demand for health and hygiene products. So is Godrej Consumer Products. There's a brand that you've launched, which is called Protect. So my question is, how do you balance your business strategy and social messaging? I'll come to Harsh with that question.
From the company's perspective, we have to look at, what we focus is what is consumer interested in, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, first of all, the product and the category is there. And when you want to talk about advertising and the connect with the consumers, right? You have to talk to them in a language, what is relevant to them today, right? Obviously, I think each and every company has to be socially responsible. And I don't think that any company can be or can exist or sustain or run for a long time, without worrying about the society in general or public in general, right? With so much of media, social media, and those kind of challenges, it is next to impossible, right? But yes, so in today's time, in terms of personal hygiene, I think for people, what is most important is how do they take care of themselves in a manner where they are not fearful, right? They can go out of their home, because now a lot of us, most of the people are traveling, or I would say, going out of home for work, etc. So how they can go out of home fearless, right? So from our perspective, we are going to only trying to understand consumers, what is relevant to them, and our message will focus on that only.
Okay. I'll come to Sanjay. There's been a lot of talk about your do-it-yourself meals compared to the single dishes that are there. Any other kind of product innovation that this crisis has spawned?
So we've been actually tracking consumers from the first peak of the crisis. So it's been a very, very interesting journey for us. So we've been like doing dipstick consumer studies and trying to figure out what does the consumer want. And there's been a substantial shift. I mean, especially from a food perspective, there's been a substantial shift in the consumer's life. Okay, and my favorite example of expressing it is really the fact that earlier she used to just cook 2 meals a day in her house. Today she's cooking 4 meals in a day.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just not breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but it is also maybe a tea, which is now got added on. So there is this added pressure that has come into a woman's life. She's at home, a whole family is at home around her, and food is almost the central part of the conversation which is happening in the home. Given that, we've actually seen 3-4 key trends that have come out from a consumer perspective. I think first and foremost, she is now seeking convenience like never before. She obviously wants to do a lot for the homemaker. There is a lot of demand from the family. At the same time, she wants to ensure that she does not have the knowledge of doing everything. So she wants to be as experimentative as possible in terms of, so experimentativeness is, and trying to spring a surprise is the second big need that has come out besides convenience. The third big need that is coming out is really the context of the disease and everything around us. And there is a huge need for health and well-being, which has come up. And given these, and the fourth need, which is quite a surprising need, but we really didn't anticipate this, was the need for indulgence. And I will qualify that indulgence because it's one of our favorite needs from a product portfolio perspective. So we've seen, therefore, a lot of sale happening in our range, and we've got 140 plus products in our portfolio, and we serve across all meal occasions, from breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and desserts. And we've seen practically every other category of ours exploding out of demand. So we've seen breakfast jump up, idli dosa sales jumping up all across the country, because fresh batter, which was being bought from the retailers earlier, is not really the most hygienic thing to do in these times. So we've seen idli dosa batter sales go up, the rava idli sales go up. We've seen the 3-minute portfolio that we had innovated on about 2-3 years ago suddenly starting to jump up in terms of our sales. So need for convenience is suddenly jumping up. We have seen products. The favorite need. So the one is satisfying convenience. The other is satisfying experimentativeness. The third and the most favorite need of ours is really the need for indulgence. And what many of us don't notice is the fact that all the sweet shops around us are shut. And earlier, if you looked at all Indian sweets, we used to actually go, if you wanted a gulab jamun, you would actually go to a shop and buy the gulab jamun and come back. You'll be surprised to know that we are doubling our sales of gulab jamun now. Gulab jamun is one of the highest selling products in our portfolio at this point in time, and we are struggling to meet the demand for this product, not just in the geographies where it was selling, but across India. I mean, it is selling in Delhi, it's selling in UP, it's selling in Calcutta, it's selling every place. Bombay, I mean, is
Sanjay, we
telling
know
like
you are responsible for a lot of our expanding waistlines. We know that. Yeah.
so it's really, I mean, it's really fantastic. I never expected this thing to happen, but logically, if you see, you know, these products, all the sweet shops around us, from where we used to get our samosas and or jalebis and other things, are all shut down. So there is a need for indulgence, which is being satisfied through this. And then there is a big emerging need of health and convenience, which is health and wellness, which has come up. And I think that is one need where we are now starting to put together a portfolio which we will start to work on. I mean, we've got certain products that are already in our portfolio, things like, you know, in the southern states. I mean, especially if you talk to the consumers in the southern states, rasam comes out to be a very big product because it's a product that is said to cure colds and coughs. So people want to drink rasam. So the rasam becomes a very important product for us. We are working around seeing how we can make rasam more accessible to consumers. Plus, we are looking at several other products in our portfolio and seeing how can we layer a need for either immunity or health and wellness that can be built on our products in terms of a delivery mechanism to our consumers. So there is a rapid acceleration of change. I think Mr. Sodhi has already done some great work in this area also.
Yeah.
And can I
Thank
just
you, Sanjay. Yes, Sunil, I was just coming to you. Yes, please go ahead.
In fact, I'll tell you one thing, you know, which while there are points which Sanjay has brought out in some of the trends, but I can tell you there's one large piece that we are seeing in terms of the consumer work, which we've been doing through a lot of online pieces. I would summarize it in one large theme called duality. You know, there's a duality taking shape in India across multiple themes. And I'll give you the examples of that. First of all, India has always been about, we are not a food company, but India has always been about taste and health. You know, all food companies would know that one of the biggest stumbling block for most MNCs in food areas who come to India, they grapple with this whole thing of getting taste and health right, you know, and it varies from district to district and obviously region to region. So I think the first duality which is taking shape more and more is that health, which always used to be a lower concern in India, it always taste mostly used to win over health in India, right? I think there's a much larger balancing which is going to happen in future. That they want taste, but they would need health assurance first. So this is one duality which is happening. So whether it's the product, you might want a gulab jamun, which also ensures that it's less calories, maybe. You know, so who knows, that maybe the next thing which will happen.
Yes.
Yeah, you want a taste of a gulab jamun, but you also want to know low count. Mr. Sodhi can add on this. I'm sure that the skimmed milk which he's talking is a phenomenon in that direction. You know, that's one duality. Second one very clearly which is happening is there is going to be both down trading, and I will qualify the indulgence piece with one word. There is going to be down trading in this country, but there is going to be value-led indulgence in this country. And this is not only limited to foods. This is going to happen in personal care. For example, what we are seeing that within hair colors itself, right? We are a very large market player in do-it-yourself at home hair color sachets, which we made big in this country, right? Where the creme sachets sell the largest. We are a market leader.
We all use them.
Talk about yourself, Alokesh. Yeah, please go ahead.
So we're seeing on one hand, there'll be down trading happening on, let's say, within your core value brands, but at the same time, indulgence will take shape, value-led indulgence. You'd love to do hair coloring, and I wouldn't be surprised if more fashion shades come in, but they will happen at a value-led indulgence. There'll be more body washes and skin products which will happen at home, but there'll be value-led indulgence. So second duality which I see is, indulgence and down trading coexisting. And the third one which I clearly see, which is going to happen, which again came up in the point somewhere, is there is going to be a duality of trust and experimentation both. You will experiment with brands, as Nimisha was mentioning, but within a repertoire of brand which you trust, right? So I think there's this continuous phenomenon of duality which will play out in this country, and that's something we'll have to learn to balance with.
Right. So Dr. Sodhi, actually, have you seen an increase in your, higher value product sales during this time, or has it fallen? What has been your experience?
See, we have seen from area to in the metro city, the bigger pack sale has increased because people are reducing the frequency of buying. And second is people have shifted from high value. When you say, I'll give you example of cheese. So you'll understand what I want to say. Cheese, our total 35% market used to be HoReCa segment, hotel, which is more or less closed down. But in spite of that market becoming zero, our cheese sales increased by 35 to 40%. The reason is when people were eating out, the restaurant seller may not be buying high-end product, a more price or quality. Whereas when you are buying for yourself, like Sunilji mentioned earlier, you want to buy only reputed brand on which you can trust, you feel it is safe, but no doubt affordable, it has to be affordable. Because we meet all those parameters, so we could get, in spite of closure of that, double the sale in cheese or in all these products. So that advantage, and I fully agree, during this lockdown or after lockdown, consumer is now considering more about the safe product, about the quality, about the affordability, and also what because being food immunity builders. I mean, we have seen people are going, I mean, we launched 4 or 5 types of milk-based drinks, whether it is a ginger, tulsi, haldi, ashwagandha, and now they're coming 4 or 5 flavors of immunity boosting ice cream also. So that is the opportunity also.
Actually, we are buying more ice cream at home than we ever did, you know, and my wife is having a major problem with that because we are a very health conscious family. You know, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but I'll still take this opportunity to ask one final, very short question, taking off from, you know, the discussion that we have just been having, and which is to the full panel. When do you see revival of demand for discretionary spends? You know, people will buy food, they have to buy food. There is no way they will live without food. But discretionary spending in terms of buying things that you may not necessarily need, right? Do you see a revival of that? You know, in the question is open to everybody. Harsh, you want to take it?
I think you're asking us a very difficult question.
Yes.
Nobody wants to take it.
That is why you are the panelist and I'm the questioner.
Maybe I can take it.
Yes.
Sure.
And let me answer. Well, I won't answer that directly. I think what I'll say is that, you know, the definition of what we call discretionary, firstly, is changing dramatically, right? And let me give you a few examples. You know, normally when we make a bucket of essential versus discretionary, and even when the government did it, a mobile phone goes into a discretionary bucket because it's a durable and not into an essential. If you look at mobile device sales, as soon as things opened up, they're actually, they're actually higher than they were in pre-COVID because there was pent-up demand. And in the consumer's mind, it is not a discretionary product; it's actually an essential. If I look at beauty, yes, you know, you can define beauty as being discretionary. You can make that choice, but you know, consumers are looking for, what Sunil referred to, what I call an affordable indulgence. You know, there is this story of a phrase called the lipstick effect. The lipstick effect is something where, you know, in every recession, there are affordable indulgences that grow because consumers are feeling so low about themselves. They need affordable indulgences to make them feel better. It could be a piece of chocolate, it could be a gulab jamun, it could be a lipstick. It's affordable, but it's still indulgent. So you still need that indulgence. And so I think, I really feel that it's not about when will discretionary spending come. I think it's also about how do you start to, you know, make products that might have been discretionary, relevant in times today, you know, address that guilt, make it an affordable indulgence, make it relevant because of the benefit it gives you. Today, a dishwasher has become an essential for consumers who can afford it. So I just changed the lens rather than necessarily saying when will the rest come back, because that nobody knows.
We understand, Nimisha, you're not sitting with a crystal gazing ball, really.
Exactly.
But we've completely run out of time. I really don't want to let you guys go because this was such an engaging conversation. I'll take this opportunity once again to thank SAP, our partner here, for allowing us this opportunity to host this great panel discussion. A big thank you to all our panelists for being here. And before we end, this is the time where India loves its smart acronyms, right? 4 S's, 4 A's. So I realized at the end of this panel discussion, we've come up with 4 R's. We talked about the response to the pandemic. We talked about the response to the lockdown. We spoke about the recovery. We spoke about the resilience and how to reboot businesses. And at the heart of all of it, the main theme that came out is agility as well as a business continuity plan. Well, it's thanks from me. Alokesh, I'll request you
Thank
to.
you all very, very much. Suchetna, you have summarized it very well. I want to thank all the audience members. They've sent us a phenomenal number of questions and very strong questions. Unfortunately, we don't have 5 hours, over a real adda that the Bengalis tend to have. It stretches for 4 or 5 hours into midnight. If we had that, we could have had, a far longer discussion. But this has been really, really awesome. And thank you all very, very much for joining us.